This is a statement from the Fatherland Group on the Lekki Massacre.
On Friday, 16th October 2020, the Fatherland Group issued a statement on the EndSARS protest, then taking place in many parts of the country, in which we called for the removal from office of the Inspector General of Police, Mohammed Adamu, as a necessary first step to rebuilding public confidence in the Nigerian police force. This simple step was not taken, and the protest continued. We believe that had our call been heeded, the massacre, which occurred exactly a week to this day, will most likely not have occurred. The protest had all the while been peaceful, with disciplined organization and a noticeably high level of female participation. That was until a violent streak was introduced when sponsored agents began to attack the peaceful protesters in order to intimidate them from exercising their human rights. On Tuesday, 20th October, the governor of Lagos State, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, in an ill-judged attempt to regain control of a tense and increasingly volatile situation in the state, declared a 24-hour curfew to commence at 4 p.m. on that day. Following interventions and appeals to the governor from various stakeholders, he gave notice that the curfew will not commence until 9 p.m. to give time and room for workers and citizens in their various outposts to beat the dreaded Lagos traffic and return to their homes before the curfew commenced. Before the new 9 p.m. start of the curfew, there was a massacre of protesters at Lekki Toll Gate by persons in the uniform of the Nigerian Army using sophisticated automatic weaponry. The timeline for the massacre is as follows. At 10:30 a.m., Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu declares curfew to start at 4 p.m. By 15:34, reports of people allegedly disabling cameras at Lekki Toll Gate. At 16:08, protesters at the toll gate peacefully singing while waving the Nigerian flag. At 1700 hours, Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu extends curfew to start at 9 p.m. At 1800 hours, Buhari, Defense Minister, and Chief of Defense Staff in closed-door meeting. At 1800 hours, lights in and around the Lekki Toll Gate were turned off. At 1845, a drone shot confirms the lights had been turned off. At 1900 hours, the massacre begins. In an interview on Arise TV's morning show on Sunday the 25th, Governor Sanwo-Olu said he was surprised to receive reports of shooting beginning at 7 p.m., he said. Initially, we couldn't believe because security operatives were not meant to be there until 10 to 11 p.m. Although live coverage through social media suggests that many demonstrators were killed in the barrage of automatic gunfire, the state governor initially claimed that there was no fatalities confirmed from the shooting. The governor has since confirmed that there were several fatalities. The Nigerian Army, for its part, denied that their soldiers were present at the location, let alone being involved in the massacre, and that reports suggesting otherwise were fake news. This led to citizens being issued with a macabre challenge to produce the bodies of those who had been killed and to parade for public viewing those who were bereaved. Yesterday, 26th of October 2020, the Nigerian Army issued a press briefing on the Chief of Army Staff General T.Y. Buruntai's meeting with principal staff officers, general officers commanding and field commanders, which held at the Army Headquarters Conference Room in Abuja. The briefing reported General Buruntai as having said, right from the onset of EndSARS protest, The Nigerian Army has been aware of the grand design by sponsors of the protest to draw it into crisis. The plan was to embark on massive propaganda to discredit the military and the government so as to set the people against the Nigerian Army once it is called out to aid the civil authorities. The Nigerian Army, being aware of the devilish plan, was careful not to be dragged in and issued the initial warning through a press release on the 14th of October 2020 of our resolve to secure and safeguard a united Nigeria. Now, the detractors, alongside their local and international collaborators, have mischievously and deliberately misrepresented troops' efforts to ensure compliance with the curfew imposed by legitimate civil authority in Lagos and other states. These agitations are falsely accusing the Nigerian Army of being responsible for the activities of the miscreants, despite glaring evidence to the contrary. In an interview with CNN on the 26th of October, Governor Sanwo-Olu confirmed the involvement of the Nigerian Army in the massacre, thereby contradicting the Army's denial. The policy of denial was repeated at the presidential level when President Muhammadu Buhari maintained a studied silence on the crisis for 48 hours until Thursday, 22nd of October. When he did finally condescend to break his silence, he chose not to mention the Lekki massacre expressly, preferring only to issue threats of further state coercive action to protesters. A state of general lawlessness ensued following the massacre as public buildings were attacked and set ablaze without any attempt at restraint from the police. Ambulances for the injured were blocked from reaching the injured, and fire trucks were prevented from responding to the arson attacks. Thus, all the agencies of state for the protection of civil society in a country's commercial capital were disabled by the state and their agents. From Governor Sanwo-Olu's interview on Arise TV on Sunday, 25th of October 2020, it emerged that the governor had made 2 attempts to speak with President Buhari following the massacre, but without success on either occasions. In fact, by the time President Buhari finally condescended to address the country on the crisis on the evening of Thursday, 22nd of October, he had not spoken with the governor of the state in which the massacre had occurred. It emerged from the interview that even as the governor was declaring a 24-hour curfew in Lagos State, most of the police assigned to the state had been withdrawn and deployed to other states. Today, it was reported that the Acting Director General of the National Broadcasting Commission, Professor Armstrong Idachaba, had imposed a fine of 3 million each on Channels TV, AIT, and Arise TV for what he called unprofessional coverage of the protest. The Fatherland Group is appalled by the use of lethal force by the Nigerian Army against peaceful protesters at Lekki Toll Gate on Tuesday, 20th of October 2020. The massacre of young Nigerians carrying the Nigerian flag and singing the national anthem was a shameful act of state mass murder. The Fatherland Group is in no doubt that what happened at Lekki Toll Gate on the 20th of October 2020 was a massacre, given that a massacre is defined as the unnecessary, indiscriminate killing of a large number of human beings. Amnesty International has confirmed that at least 12 people were killed in the incident, and other reports have suggested that the figure was many more that number. The killings were unnecessary as the protesters were peaceful and unarmed, and also there were various crowd control measures available to the state short of lethal force, such as water cannon and tear gas, which were not used. The killings were indiscriminate, as the lights on the Lekki Toll Gate had been extinguished ahead of the killings, so that the army were shooting blind. The Fatherland Group finds disturbing the failure of the various arms of the government to take responsibility for the massacre of the young Nigerians by their own army on their own soil. The claim by the army that no soldiers were involved in the massacre is embarrassing and breathtaking in its sheer recklessness. We find it hard to believe that President Buhari, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, and the retired Major General, the Defense Minister, and General Buruntai, the Chief of Defense Staff, were reported to be in a closed-door meeting an hour before the shooting started, but they knew nothing about the deployment of soldiers to the Lekki protest. General Buruntai should explain the precise nature of the efforts which he admits his forces took to ensure compliance with the curfew imposed by legitimate civil authorities in Lagos. The least that citizens are entitled to, from those exercising coercive powers over them, is a modicum of accountability. The Fatherland Group is troubled by the revelations that police assigned to Lagos State had been deployed to duties in other states, such that while the army were deployed to use maximum and deadly force against peaceful protesters, no police were available to arrest those who, under cover of protest, had been organized to destroy and set fire to valuable assets and buildings in the state. In the circumstances where Lagos had been singled out as the epicenter of the protest so as to justify the deployment of the army to enforce a curfew in the state, the Inspector General of Police should explain the decision to deploy police assigned to Lagos to duties in other states, leaving the commercial capital of the country unprotected. The Fatherland Group finds sinister the decision taken at 10:30 a.m. to declare a curfew to begin at 4 p.m. on the same day, only for the beginning of the curfew to then be pushed back to 9 p.m. And yet, for General Buruntai's soldiers' effort to enforce the curfew to begin before the new commencement time. In the circumstances where the traffic situation in Lagos is legendary, Governor Sanwo-Olu should explain his reasons for initially setting the curfew time to begin at the unrealistic hour of 4 p.m. He should also explain when, how, and to whom within the armed forces he communicated the revised 9 p.m. commencement time, leading to his comment that, and I quote, the security operatives were not meant to be in there until 10 to 11 p.m. The Fatherland Group finds unacceptable the report that a private company operating a concession from the state government to provide lighting on the Lekki Toll Gate could decide to extinguish the lights and billboard lights for no logical reason. The coincidence of the timing of this action and also of the removal of high-resolution definition number plate recognition LRP cameras with the commencement of the massacre which followed is troubling and calls for explanations from the proprietors of these companies. The Fatherland Group considers it a national disgrace that the various arms of the government have shown this level of callousness towards young Nigerians, in the same month as they were enjoined to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the grant of independence to their country. The Fatherland Group calls upon the government to bring closure to this disgraceful saga by ending the campaign of denial to allow the injured and the bereaved the dignity and healing which they deserve. The Fatherland Group condemns the fines which the National Broadcasting Commission has imposed on the news outlets for their coverage of the massacre. We view it as an attempt to coerce journalists and news outlets from performing their public information responsibilities. The Fatherland Group once again thanks Nigerians in diaspora, members of the international community, for the concern and support which they have shown for the well-being of the citizens of Nigeria, and calls upon them to continue to remain engaged until justice is done in this matter.